right, so just want to start by looking at our training objectives for our hour here this morning. We're going to first be looking at where the program action plan is located in PIDS. Second, we're going to be looking at the components within the program leadership team dashboard. We're also going to be learning what data flows automatically into the action plan. We're going to also take a look at what is the best order of operations to enter data that flows into the action plans. And then finally, we are going to dive into the action plans and learn how to complete one from scratch. I want to just talk a little bit about some basics and high-level information before we actually dive into the system. So this slide, I want to talk a little bit about access and security. As with all areas of PIDS, certain user roles grant you access to certain areas of the system with certain permissions. So let's first take a look at what user roles have access to add, edit, or delete action plans in the PIDS system. Those roles are the data collector, the classroom coach data collector, and the leadership coach. Now, there are also roles within the system that may not have access to add, edit, and delete, but do have access to view those action plans. And those roles are the detailed data viewer, hub data collector, hub detailed data viewer, state data collector, and state detailed data viewer. So just take a look at where the action plan is located within PIDS. This is a slight change in PIDS, as most forms live within the dashboard that has the same title. For example, you can find the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0 form in the Benchmarks of Quality 2.0 form dashboard. The action plan for this is located in the Program Leadership Team dashboard. And within that dashboard, we're going to take a look at the other components that are in that dashboard as well. And so those components include, at the top is the action plan itself, followed by the action plan meeting schedule. There's also a section for leadership team members and the program address. Now, I have the leadership team members highlighted here because that's an important component that when that data is filled in there, it does flow into the action plan. And we're going to take a look at that and talk about that in a bit more detail here in a bit. But want to just point out that the action plan does not have its own dashboard as some of the other forms do, that it does live within the program leadership team dashboard in the PIDS system. So when we decided to develop the action plan, we wanted to design it so that other information that's being entered into the system can flow into this document. This reduces the need to enter the same information in multiple places in the PIDS system and also provides users with a very thorough action plan document when it's all completed with all pertinent information. So there are three main areas that do pull into the action plan from other areas of PIDS. So the first one is the pyramid model professionals or employees. So this is very high level, not detailed, not specific to an individual information that, as we'll see later when we get into the action plan itself, but does bring information into that plan. The next is the benchmarks of quality. So whether you're doing an FCC BOQ or the EC BOQ, that information will flow into the action plan and the system will highlight the critical elements that are not in place yet. And then the last one that we just talked about on the previous screen are those team members. So that is one of those components that is in the program leadership team dashboard. And that information does also flow into the action plan. So all of these pieces are being pulled into the action plan to help with that flow of information and make sure you don't have to enter things multiple places more than once, and also puts pertinent information present and visible on the action plan itself. So it's always helpful in PIDS to know the order of operations that's best practice for any time you're working with a new form. So I want to go through that order of operations, but it is important to note that this can be done out of sequence, of course. It's not required that you do it in this order, but it just flows better if it is possible to do it in this order of operations. that prevents you from going into the action plan, starting the plan, entering information, and then having to leave the action plan to go to another section of PIDS to add additional information in because you want it to pull in. So we have that order of operations we looked at where we're wanting to make sure we have our pyramid model professionals or our employees already loaded into the system and entered in there. We want to make sure that information is current and up to date so that accurate information is being presented on our plan. If possible, to have our benchmarks of quality in there makes sense because it is going to pull in those critical elements that are not in place yet into our plan so we can develop our steps from those critical elements, as well as our leadership team members. So that one just makes really good sense. So let's put in all of those leadership team members. And so that section on the plan, as we're going to see here soon, is going to be complete for us. All right, so with that, I am going to now jump into PIDS for the demonstration within PIDS. Okay. All right, so now I'm in the login screen. So the first screen that we come to when we first log into PIDS, and I'm in our test site today. And for this demonstration, I am going to be using the data collector role within my program in Alice in Wonderland. So I'm going to go ahead and select that role. So the first step in my process here is I'm going to make sure that I have all of those data points collected so that all of the information flows right into my action plan. So I'm going to take a quick moment to make sure I have all of that in place so that when I start my action plan, I don't have to bounce out of there and go to another section of the system. That's really going to save me some time. So first, let's look at the benchmarks of quality. So we're going to click on the benchmarks of quality dashboard. And we're not going to actually go through a BOQ today because that's not what the training is focused on, but just want to walk through a normal process that you might go through when developing your action plan for the first time. So we can see here that we have a bunch of BOQs in here. We're going to be developing our action plan for June of 2023 into 2024. So I can see I have a BOQ that was just done in May. So that's great. We can use the content and information in that benchmarks of quality and pull it in and develop our steps from that. So nothing in addition we need to do there. That all looks good. Next, we want to take a look at our pyramid model professionals and make sure that the information in there is current and accurate and up to date. So if I click on the pyramid model professionals, what I'm looking for here is just to make sure that if there's somebody that maybe has left our program, we can go ahead and add that separation date. And also if there's anybody that is not on this list that we might need to add that has been hired and brought on and we just haven't updated our PID system to reflect that, we want to make sure that we are putting that information in so that when we're looking at the counts in our action plan of how many employees we have and what the turnover has looked like, that information is accurate. So again, not going to dive in too deep in how to modify the pyramid model professionals, but just as a review, you use the actions button here if you want to go in and access, for example, Lily Jones here and edit this person's record to add that separation date perhaps. Or if we needed to add somebody new to our roster, we can click on the Add New Professional button and add those employees to our roster. Right. So we'll go ahead and walk through the steps of just adding a new, I'm sorry, we're going to do a leadership team member. So now that we have checked through that, we're going to jump into our dashboard that has our action plan and also our leadership team members in there. I'm going to click on Program Leadership Team Dashboard. And here's where we're going to be working throughout the rest of this demo. So we've checked our external components of our BOQ. We've got our employees that are current, so we're good to go. Now we can move on to our Program Leadership Team Dashboard. So as mentioned on our slide previously, we saw that there are 4 different sections to this leadership team dashboard. Okay, so at the very top, we have our action plans, followed by our action plan schedule. Next, we have our program leadership team members. And then the last piece is a place that you can enter the program address. Not optional, but just a place, if you'd like to use it, is a place you can enter that information. So we do want to make sure that our program leadership team members are current, just as we did our pyramid model professionals, but this is a newer area of the system, so we are going to demonstrate putting in a new person in this list. So just as we would do with the employees or pyramid model professionals, to edit one or to put that this person is no longer on our leadership team, we can click the actions button and edit. So now we have pulled up Francis here, and we're going to say that they're good here, and we don't need to make any modifications, but perhaps they're no longer on the team, so we can go ahead and enter that date. So we'll just do that as a demonstration here. Put in that they left last Friday, they're no longer on our leadership team, so we popped in that leave date, and now we can save that. And now this person won't show up on our action plan when we go to create it. Although we can still see them in this list, and we can see when their leave date was. So the system is going to keep an archive list of all of those members of your leadership team when they started and when they left. So similarly, we can go ahead and add a new member by clicking on the Add New Member button up here. So if I click on Add New Member, we can go ahead and add a new leadership team member to our roster. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and first select the program. Next, we're going to put in the person's name, last name, their ID number. So if you have one, you want to just put in there, otherwise the system will create one for you. The email address. You can put in the phone number if you like, but that is an optional field. And then we click on the roles button. And when we click in this field, it does present us with a drop-down list in which we can select multiple options. So if a person does multiple roles within our leadership team to describe what they do and who they are, then we can go ahead and select multiple. And then finally, we want to put when they started. So we'll put that they started today, and we'll go ahead and save that. So anytime we save something in PIDS, it will always give us that green success, program leadership team member was successfully added, or if we missed a step, something that was required, or there was an error on the form, it would also tell us that and give us a validation error. Right, so then it automatically brings me back to my program leadership team dashboard. So I'm still in that same dashboard. And now if I scroll down to my leadership team members, I can see that those changes have been made. So I have now added Tweedledee to our roster here for leadership team members. And I again see that we have put Francis as discontinued. All right. Okay, so now that we have gone through all of the pieces that are kind of prepping our tool for completion, we can now go in and start the action plan process. I'm going to scroll up to the top of our leadership team dashboard here. And we can see that we have a few that have already been completed for previous years. So as you start to use this tool and add more to the system, they are all going to be archived in one place for you. From here, I could come in and again, click our actions button. I could make edits. I could delete because I have that access within this data collector role. I could also view the details and print it off. So all of those are accessible to me to see what was going on previously. So, but we're going to go ahead and focus now on creating a new action plan. So one of the cool things that this new tool does that we haven't designed yet in other previous tools in PIDS is it has this copy forward function. So I want to take a minute to talk about that first. So typically when you click an add new button, you're only presented with one option, and that is to add a new something and add a new form to the system. But we see here when we click our add new action plan button, we are presented with add new blank action plan or pre-fill new action plan. So because plans, we want to continue them from year to year, and we don't want to have the person have to go in and rewrite information that may not have changed from year to year or might just need minor updating. We added this new pre-fill new action plan feature to save some time. So I'm going to show that, but we are going to complete one from a blank action plan here. I'll click on the pre-fill new action plan to show what this looks like. So it's going to pull in my most recent action plan, and it's going to present me with that actual tool. So here I am in the action plan itself. We can see up at the top that it gives me these kind of warnings in these yellow boxes. Because this was pre-filled from a previous action plan, we want to make sure that the users are going through and reviewing the information and making appropriate updates, not just copying one and saving it and calling it a day. So each section that is modifiable will have this warning yellow box. And when I am done reviewing it or making any minor changes that I might need to make, I can click this section is complete and accurate, and I can move on to the next section. So scrolling down, I see my leadership team members, and we're going to dive into all the details of these different sections of the plan here. But just want to show you how that function works, that now, okay, I have another section that is a modifiable section. It's not just information that's being presented to me from another area of the system. And so I would go ahead and make my changes or leave it the same if that's relevant, but mark that this section is complete and accurate. So I would need to do that all the way down through the whole thing before I can go ahead and call it final and save it and then check this box that everything is good and set and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel so we can return back, and I don't start a new one because we want to do one from a blank form. So it did start one that is a draft, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that one that was started for us. That does highlight one of the great features about this tool is that it is a save as you go. So as you go ahead and start it and you want to come back maybe throughout multiple meetings and add information and change information, you can do that. It's not a tool where you have to sit down and complete the entire thing from start to finish and then save it without fear of losing any data. So let's go ahead now and do a blank action plan. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. And before I dive into each of the 8 sections, I do just want to take a moment and pause to see if there are any questions about the previous sections that I have talked about thus far, or if we're ready to dive into this piece of the presentation, I'll go ahead and move forward. So I want to just take a moment and see if there are any questions in the chat that have come up, or if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, feel free to do so at this time. So I'll pause here for a minute.
Hi, hi, Summer. I just wanted to say that this is also available to family child care. We have the family child care BOQ and the action plan. So just wanted to note that.
Thanks, Ian. All right, great. So if no questions in the chat or that folks want to unmute and go ahead and ask your questions, we will go ahead and move on here with the content. So we're going to roll right into let's creating this action plan. So we're going to do this from start to finish now from a blank template. So we're presented here with our basic information, which is section 1. And as you can see, I don't see anything else. If I scroll down, I don't have any other information compared to what I just saw a glimpse of when we were looking at that pre-fill option. We saw a lot of information. I don't see that yet. The system wants me to go ahead and put this basic information in first, which is then going to log it and save it into the database. So we're going to start here by selecting our program, our action plan start date. What we want to do. And then our action plan end date. Now, this is an important piece that the system is going to do some validations here. So I have entered my start date as of today, and my end date is next year at the end of May. We want to say that's when we're going to call our action plan done. The system will not let you create an action plan that is a longer duration than 1 year. So if I were to try to bump this out to say July of 2024, it is going to give me a validation error and tell me that I can't have a plan that's longer than a year. That's an important piece to note, but certainly shorter, any duration of months, you can make your plans for as long as you need to. The system also pre-fills in a little bit of information for me. So it tells me when the program started. So we can see our launch date was in March of 2009. We can see that we're in cohort A for this state and this test site. The next question it's asking me is the leadership coach involved? So this is just a simple yes or no. And leadership coach here is your process coach, your external coach, or your leadership coach. It's called multiple things in multiple states, but that is that person that is providing that support to the leadership team and to the program for their implementation. So we're just indicating here, do we have a leadership coach that's involved in this? Yes or no. So if we say no, then it just is that it leaves it as a no, and we don't need to do anything else. But if I do click yes, then it's going to give me an additional field that I need to add some information to. And so this is now asking me, okay, well then who is our primary leadership coach? And if I click on this drop-down list, I see my name is presented there. Names will be presented in this list if they are a user in the system with the leadership coach role. Okay, so that's how people end up in this drop-down list. So if you go to do an action plan and you know you have a leadership coach, so you click yes, but there's nothing in this drop-down, it means that leadership coach, that their access to PIDS needs to be modified a bit. And so they need to have that leadership coach role to be able to pull into this menu. So that's something you may need to get your state administrator involved with to help out. Certainly let that coach know, hey, you're not in the system as a leadership coach, and then they can help with that. So I'll go ahead and select my name. And then it's going to ask me for our leadership team mission statement. So this is a place where you can just write text words into this box. Just put something in here. And now I've completed all of my required fields for the basic information section, so I can go ahead and save. Now we do have this additional notes comments section that is just as it is, additional notes, other details that you may just want to note, but it is optional. So from there, we're going to go ahead and save our basic information, our section 1 here of the plan. And now, just like with the teapot or tippy toes forms and other tools in the system, or when you're adding a pyramid model professional or a child into the system, those all function exactly the same way, where you have your basic information that needs to be entered, log it into the database. And then from there, you can go through and fill out all of the other details that are a part of that tool. So now we can see if we scroll down, we have lots more information that we can go through and start to fill in. So our next section, section 2, is the active leadership team members. Okay, so here is where we did some work before jumping into this tool to make sure our list of leadership team members was current and up to date. We did put an end date for somebody who was no longer on our leadership team, and so that person isn't showing up on our list. And we also added a new leadership team member. As you remember, we entered Tweedledee as our new team member and put their start date as of today. So this is pulling in all of those active team members for the dates that I've put on my plan. Okay, so it's looking at that as well. So this is what we call a not modifiable section or view only. It's only presenting me with information. So this is where that order of operations comes in handy. If we were to have just jumped into our action plan and started filling this out right out the gates, and we recognize, oh, we're missing a leadership team member, we need to add that person, or, oh, that person's no longer on our team, we can't do anything from this screen to change it. We can't modify that information here. It's just being presented to us so that when we print off our whole plan, we have this very nice, complete, thorough document. So it's just showing us that information. So then we move on to section 3, which is our meeting dates section. Okay. So this is a modifiable section. I know that because I can see I have an add new meeting dates button, and this information isn't flowing in from another area of the system. So this is where the team can go in throughout the year as needed and add dates and meeting information related to the action plan. So I'll click on the add new meeting date button here in this section. And like with all other sections where it has its own add new button, it's going to pop open those fields a little bit below. So we're still within section 3 here. We've clicked add new meeting date, and now we're going to select when we had a meeting. So let's say we had a meeting today, and our leadership coach, yes, they were in attendance. And then I can add some details and some notes about the meeting. Okay. And then we can save that. All right. So each entry is its own save. Each meeting is its own entry. And so to add additional meetings, we would just repeat that process. Our next section, which is section 4 here, are meeting dates that are proposed by the leadership coach. Okay, so we can see here that, again, this is one of those display only, not modifiable. I don't have an actions button to edit this information. I don't have an add new button. So this is information flowing in from another area. This is information flowing in from a specific dashboard that was designed for the leadership coaches. So when they have access to PIDS via that leadership coach role, they will have access to a new dashboard as well. And that dashboard will allow them to suggest or propose meetings for the program. And then that information is presented here in the action plan. So just to try to make the information cohesive and flow from one person to the next, it's just showing here that the leadership coach would like to meet in March and May and August and October of 2023. And so then I know that information. I can follow up with the coach and discuss whatever the details are around that. So section 4 again is information that is not modifiable. That's information coming in from the leadership coach themselves into our plan. Okay. Next section is our meeting ground rules. So this is section 6, or I mean, section 5 has a max of 6 rules that can be entered here. And so each rule is its own entry into the system. So I do see that this is a modifiable area of the plan because I have my add new ground rules button. So I can go ahead and click add new ground rules. And then my fields open up a little bit below. So we can add each rule one at a time. So I'm going to state that this is our first rule and add our rule description Please be on time for all meetings. And save that. Okay, so that one has been entered into the database now as its own row of data. I can now see that it's reflected here on my tool. I can make modifications to it by clicking that actions button and editing it. I could also delete it if I need to correct it and it just wasn't supposed to be on the plan. And then I can go ahead and repeat that to add another one. So if I click on add new ground rule again, I can indicate number 2 and say something like that. And save that. So now you can see how I'm starting to build out my ground rules for our action plan team meetings. Right. The next section is, again, one of those not modifiable static information. It's information being pulled in from other areas of the PIDS system. And so this is where that employee information or the pyramid model professionals that we had entered or we had checked to make sure it was all current and accurate and up to date. That's why we did this, is this section, because the action plan will show us the number of active staff that we have in the PIDS system, the number of staff that were hired, and the number of staff that have left our program. So it gives you a little bit of that HR data, a little bit of insight into what's going on with hiring and people leaving, and gives you a sense of what the turnover is looking like, because you might want to use some of that information or take that into consideration when developing your action steps. So I think it's important to note too that this is truly looking at people in the pyramid model professionals dashboard that have been marked as an employee of the program. So as you may know, when entering people into the pyramid model professionals, they can be employees of the program. Most of them are, but there's also sometimes we're entering people, maybe even ourselves as a coach in the system, and we're not marking ourselves as employees of the program. So that information for those people is not going to be presented in this screen here in this section 6. It's really only people that have been marked as an employee of the program. Scrolling down, I am coming up to section 7, and this is the second to last section in our action plan. And this is where we have our benchmarks of quality that flow into the system. Okay, so it's a really nice visual for me. I can see I have my critical element key here up at the top to help me with those abbreviations down here. It will tell me which BOQ it's pulling in. So it's pulling in the most recent BOQ. So this is important because this is based off of the dates of my action plan. So if we remember up at the top of my action plan, I'll scroll up there real quick. My start date was 6/28, so today. So the system is going to do some checks and looks in the system for me, and it's going to look and it's going to pull in whatever the most current BOQ is for this section, but it's not going to pull in anything that is older than 6 months. So if my BOQ was much older than that, we haven't done it in 6 months, this section will be blank. There's not going to be BOQ information presented here. That does not mean that you can't continue on to work on your action plan, and maybe part of the plan is to redo that BOQ because it is a little bit older. But just want to point that out, that if it's older than 6 months, it will not pull into here. Otherwise, it is going to pull into here the most current scores for the most recent BOQ that we have done for this program. Also, the system is going to do some nice highlighting for me. So in the red, it's going to show me the critical elements that are not in place yet. And then in the yellow, it's going to show me the critical elements that are partially in place. It's not going to pull forward any critical elements that are already in place, because that wouldn't really make a lot of sense to build an action step around an element that's already completed and in place. I can see here, though, that this is certainly not the complete BOQ. There's more pages to it. So down here, you want to make sure you're taking note of how many pages you have so that you're sure you're looking at all of the different critical elements that are not quite in place for the program yet. So I can scroll to the next page, the next page, the next page. All right. So this is also information that's not modifiable. I can't come in here and make any changes to this particular BOQ. And if I look in here and I said, oh, well, this one actually is in place and it's not partially in place anymore, I can't make changes to the BOQ from within this screen. That would have to happen in the BOQ dashboard, or we would be doing a different BOQ at that point. And as Ian mentioned too, this flows in, the FCC BOQ would be flowing into the family child care action plan if we were doing that from a family child care perspective. So that content would flow in here. Right.
Hey, Summer, there was a question.
Okay.
So to clarify, the indicator status will be blank if the BOQ has not been updated within 6 months.
Correct. So this section will just be blank. There won't be anything in here to refer to or look back on. All right, thanks. Any other questions or follow-ups?
So I just want to, like, when you say this space, you're moving your cursor around quite a bit. Would the whole chart be blank or just the indicator status?
So this section 7, the benchmarks of quality information, it just will not show. It'll show this section is automatically filled. It'll show the critical elements key, but the rest of it, where we see most recent BOQ date, and then we see these yellow and red critical elements, this will not be presented.
So there just won't be anything beyond critical, the titles.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. So then that is what's in section 7, presenting our benchmarks of quality information. So now we get down into the heart of our action plan, which is our last section, section 8. And so this is where we're now going to start developing and creating our action steps. So each action step, just like all of the other entries, is its own entry into the database. So it's going to require me to click the Add New button and save after each entry, right? So we're going to walk through that now. So we'll start a new action step by clicking on Add New Action Step. And then it's going to open up all of the fields that are available for me to create my action step. So we saw, in practice here, if we're looking at this, we see that the critical element, scrolling back up to our BOQ, number 3 is partially in place. So let's just say we're going to build an action step around that critical element. So scrolling back down here, down to 8, we are asked what indicator. So this is where we are going to say we want to work on ELT, establishing leadership teams, critical element 3. Okay, because that one we see up ahead or up above is partially in place, not quite there yet. When I click on the critical element, it does a little bit of work for me. It's going to bring in which category this is, so established leadership team. It's also going to give me a nice description of what that element is. So the team has regular meetings, scheduled 1 time per month. Member attendance is consistent. So this is the element we're going to try now as a team to get it into that partially in place, move it into that in place category for the year. So now I have several different fields that we're going to fill in. The first is, what is the problem, issue, task that we're needing to address here? So we know that the issue is around the leadership teams, but we might want to be a bit more specific about what the problem is. So team is meeting inconsistently and lacking full member attendance, something like that. Okay, so you're going to type in this field. The team is going to come up with a description of what is it that we're trying to tackle here so that this element can be turned into an in-place element. The next box I'm going to move over to is the action step or the activity. So what are we going to do to accomplish or to take care of this problem that we have addressed related to this particular critical element. So perhaps we're going to say that we're going to send out a survey to gather information about availability of members and create a new schedule. Okay. Pardon my typos there. Okay. And we can add more to that. All right, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as that. So we're going to send out a survey. We're going to get some information. We're going to try to revamp this schedule so we can get on a more monthly routine basis. Who's going to be responsible for this? We'll say that we're going to put our new member, Tweedledee, responsible for this. And they're going to go ahead and send out that survey and try to create this new calendar of meetings. So our descriptions are here, and these are derived by the team and what we want this to look like and how we want it to sound and what the description needs to be. Next is our target date. Okay, so we know that if we went all the way up to our plan at the very top, we said this action plan was going to be until next May, at the end of May. So that was our date range for this whole plan. But perhaps we want to see if we can accomplish this a little bit sooner than the end of May. So maybe we're going to say, we think we can get this done by, I don't know, this fall. So maybe we say October 2nd of this year is when we think we can have this one taken care of. So we can put a date in there that is not, you know, May 31st of 2024. We can put a shorter duration in here, and as we meet these goals, great, we can change that status, we can add another one and continue working through our action plan that way. Certainly though, it wouldn't make sense for us to put a target date that's outside of that range. So if I were to try to enter a target date here of August of next year, which is way longer than our action plan duration, it's going to give me a validation error and it won't let me do that. Then the last piece to each action step is the current status. So this one we're going to say is in progress because we're going to start on it today, but perhaps it's one that maybe we're not quite starting yet. We're going to start next month or as we hire somebody or something like that. You can create a step, a plan to do something and then not indicate that we're not quite starting this yet. We're not going to start the clock yet for this one. Well, we'll say we're going to start this one right away. So we're going to put that it's in progress and our status date is going to be today. Right? So this is now a complete action step. We have our indicator, our problem, our action step, who's responsible, when do we want to accomplish this by, what the status is and what the status date is. So I'm going to go ahead and click my save button. And then it's going to enter it into the database for me. And now it's a part of my action plan. So my action plan now we see has one action step. And so to add more to it, we would repeat this process. So we would come in and do our add new action step button. And we would walk through those steps again. Okay. So I'm going to go through it one more time, just a little bit quicker this time, so we can see that process once more. So we'll go add new action step, scroll down a little bit. We'll select our critical element indicator that we want to work on. Okay. When we select that, our description pops in for us. Okay. We're going to identify what the problem is. Okay. We are going to identify what we are going to do to accomplish this. We are going to identify who is responsible. We're going to select our target date that again could be at the end of our entire action plan next May, but it could be also any date within there. So we'll just grab November 1 for this one. And our status. So we'll say that this one is not yet started. We're going to start that in a
Well,
little
you
bit.
found it, okay? Because it's close to home.
Hi, Claudia. We're getting a little bit of feedback from you.
Sorry, so
That's
sorry.
okay. Oh, you're fine. All right, so we're going to say that this one is not yet started, and we are going to put our status date again as of today or whenever you're working on this, and we're going to save that. All right. So now our action plan has 2 action steps in there, and we can continue to build the plan from there. Now, one thing I want to mention is as we're working on this living, breathing document throughout the course of a year, we are going to have changes to action steps. And so when that happens, we want to come in and make those changes using our actions button here. Okay. So let's say for our first action step, we made some progress on that, or we want to change the status, something changed with it. So we can go ahead and click our actions button and edit to open it back up. And now all the fields are modifiable. So maybe as we were reviewing this, we're like, oh, we really need to add another person responsible. We can do that. Maybe we want to add a different action step. We can add information here. So really any of these fields are modifiable at this point. So the team can customize this and make changes as they see fit throughout as time goes on. So as you remember, we entered our status because we were going to start this one right away as in progress as of today. So if a status changes, what I would like to encourage you to do is certainly you could come in and change it using this actions button. But I think what is a better practice is to go ahead and enter a new action step status. That way you're archiving the progress of this particular action step over the course of the year. So you'll be able to see if you add a status each time rather than modifying it, that this is when we entered it, but we decided it was not going to be starting. And then this is when we determined it was in progress and we're working on it. And this is when we determined it was completed, or this is when we went back to not started. So we'll track all of that. You'll see the lifespan of each action step by doing it this way. So we can say that maybe we decided we're going to shift it to it's not started actually, and we can go ahead and save that. Right. So here's where then you'll be able to see the history of your action step as you go along and work through your plan. Right. So I've made all of my updates to my previously entered action step. And so I'll go ahead and save that. Okay. And now you might be thinking, why do I have multiple save buttons there? That was a little confusing. So just remember that each entry into each of these sections is its own form that's being entered into the database. So I'm going to have a save button for that particular form, that component, as well as I have a save button always at the very bottom of this entire form that's composed of 8 sections at the very bottom here. Okay. So by saving this, I'm saving my entire action plan, and then I will go back to starting at the program leadership team dashboard where we began. Okay. But before I do that, I want to again take a pause. I see there's some comments coming through in the chat. So I want to see if there are questions or other areas that you'd like me to revisit in this action plan.
I think we just clarified the dates a little bit with like how the BOQ comes in.
Okay, great. Anything else to add there, or you want to just
No,
okay.
basically just if what I wrote in the chat wasn't so clear, the BOQ that comes into the action plan will need to be at least 6 months before the action plan start date or within the action plan dates. So
Right.
basically it's a window of 6 months before the action plan starts and any time during that action plan.
Right. And there is an example of the dates in the handout that was provided with this webinar too. So again, if you didn't get that, please go ahead and shoot your email in the chat, and Amelia we make sure that you get a copy of that. But it does, because it is a little tricky. Dates are kind of tricky like that. So it does give you a nice example of what the window is. And so that was designed that way so that we're making sure we're getting current information being built into these action plans, and not information that's a bit dated, or that we should be going back and maybe revisiting the BOQ to make sure we're creating relevant action steps to work towards.
So can I ask a question? So if the BOQ is more than 6 months, it's not going to show up on the action plan. Will the user or the data entry person be stopped there, or are they still able to make action steps? Will it be halted so that we're reminded to review an action plan that's more current? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I do. And it will not stop you from like saving your action plan. I kind of want to, as far as will it let you create an action step, Ian, do you know if it will let you create an action step? I feel like it will.
I think it will let you create an action step. There just won't be a BOQ
Right.
form to relate the indicators to above.
Right.
So, but it won't, not allow you. And then when you mention like, will there be something that tells you you're not in the current plan, that comes into play, I believe when you go down a few action plans and you start pre-filling to the next one, if you end up by accident in last year's, it will say you're not in the most recent plan. Please review or go to that plan. But there might be a reason why you're not in the most recent plan as well.
So then another, I guess it's a technical question. If, say, once the action plan is generated, and if the BOQ, let's say, was completed in January, I come in here and generate my action plan in March, because it takes a whole meeting and then some to go through the BOQs. And then come March, we're like, all right, we got our BOQs reviewed. Let's get the action plan rolling. Now, when we get to August, it's been more than 6 months. Will the BOQ remain active since the action plan has been generated before that 6-month window, or will the BOQ now disappear from the action plan after that 6 months?
It's going to depend on what your dates are for your action plan. So really all of that is contingent on that action plan start date and that action plan end date window, which can be no greater than 1 year.
Right.
So if the BOQ
Yeah.
falls anywhere in that prior to 6 months within that year itself, it's going to show up in there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess it's in there. I just needed to process and hear it. Thank you.
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you, Debbie. All right. Any other questions right now?
One very little thing, Summer, I want to clarify on the section 3, the meeting dates, I think, can you add a future date, or is that only for dates that have passed?
I think that you can add a future date, but let's go ahead and make sure. So just to explain what I'm doing, I'm going to go back in using my actions button and edit the action plan we were just working in. And I am going to scroll down to the meeting date section, add a date. I believe I remember talking about this when we were designing it and thinking that a forward.
Yeah, I had an idea. I just want to make sure. Great. So that could be used for kind of planning on the program end as well.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I do want to mention too that while we have focused in this training on the program action plan, This feature and these forms also exist for the community-wide benchmarks of quality and the community action plan, as well as the statewide BOQ and the state action plan. There's going to be a few little differences. For example, in the statewide action plan, instead of employees, it's going to show active programs. So there's just a couple of little changes that just make sense when you're designing an action plan around the statewide benchmarks of quality. But if you're somebody that works in PIDS at the hub level, you have the hub data collector role, you will have access to it. If you're at the state level and you have a state data collector role, you will be able to go into those dashboards and access the action plan at that level. So wanted to just point that out, that this isn't just for programs, it was done at each of those levels as well. One last thing too, I wanted to note is that we are in the process of designing reports around this new tool. So because it is a very new tool in the system, we're just getting folks started to use it, which is why we scheduled this webinar when we did. But recognize certainly that as states come in and start to use this tool, we are going to want to design some really meaningful reports, especially around those action steps that are meaningful. So please, if you have thoughts on that, communicate those to your state PIDS leaders. If you're not sure who that is, you can certainly reach out to me. So if you have thoughts on that, you think a certain report would be really excellent to add to the system, we are in the development phases of that. So would love to hear any feedback that you might have on that. Great, well then I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing so I can see faces of who's all on, which is very nice. So thank you all so much for attending today. I'm gonna go ahead and